All right. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our next session here. We are currently doing the Gold Sponsor Vendor Hall sessions. In this tier, we have some excellent sessions. This is going to be another one here. And this is with Gold Sponsor, the Dispatch Lab, and our speaker is Halcyon Frank or LaFranc. And she's going to be doing a session called Building Better Training. Take it away, my friend.
Good morning, everybody. No, you were still waiting, Gary. I was still tying my shoes. Okay, it takes me a long time. And I just really wanted to build up anticipation and make you guys think that like there was some really good stuff coming. So hopefully I don't disappoint. So we'll go through it kind of quickly since me and technology, again, are butting heads, but we will jump right into building better training. If you don't know who I am Halcyon Frank. I am the founder and training consultant at the Dispatch Lab. I am also an assistant supervisor for Saunders County Sheriff's Office in Eastern Nebraska. I love training, obviously. I get to do it quite often as we go through people, as many other centers do, fairly regularly. I am super pumped and excited and all the things to be here as a sponsor of the Dare to Be Great. If you guys have been around since the first one, I was actually honored and so lucky to be a keynote at that first one. So it's awesome for me to see it come full circle to part 3. I cannot promise Ricardo that I will not peer pressure him to do some more later on, but we'll give him a break for now. So we will dive in. So first and foremost, if you've ever seen my presentations, I love quotes. I'm always picking up new ones. For this one from Jonathan Hall, trainers are in the business of making things easy to understand and remember. We as trainers should always be aiming to make things simple and easy to remember and how we can get people to learn in the simplest, most effective ways. That's kind of always the goal. So why should we do anything? We always want to know why, as we'll talk about, but we should always aim for better training. One, employee morale. If people don't feel like they know what they're doing, then they're not going to enjoy their job as much. They're not going to feel as confident. In retention, some days it feels like we need every single help we can get with keeping people on board, right? And I apologize. I've got 2 screens going, so if it looks like I'm looking off, that's why. But we need them to stick around so desperately sometimes, right? Less micromanagement and supervision. If we know that they're trained and they're doing what they're supposed to be doing, we don't have to keep after them. We don't have to keep on them because we know that they're doing what they should be doing. And then better flexibility and adaptability. This job changes so much. Situations are so fluid. So we have to make sure that we're able to adapt to whatever the situation is. We're not for everyone. We're for a lot of people, but we're not necessarily for everyone, Allie. So all these things, lead to better training as well as many other benefits of when we have a good, efficient training program in place. So first and foremost, whether you're starting a new training program, whether you're revamping yours, you always want to set goals. What is the end goal that you're trying to get to? And they can be, kind of bigger, higher level goals or down to the little ones. But we want to do better than just train people to do the job well. We got to get a little more specific, a little more into the weeds, if you will. You want to make sure that your goals follow those smart goals that, that you're able to measure and make sure that they're working. So again, they can be from kind of the higher, loftier goals of we want to have an efficient training programs that people are able to operate the radio effectively, and then get into your smaller ones. What does that actually look like? So they're able to page fire departments. They're able to handle emergency traffic on the radio. They're able to discern what towers are being used, kind of those more in the weed goals. Next, after you've set your goals, again, this is whether you're doing a new training program or you're revamping, you want to review any existing training you already have. You may not even have a whole program, but you may have some bits and pieces that you can then put into a whole program. Yes, Lori, specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and timely goals. That first letter was escaping me. So review what you have, see what you've got. And then as we go through, we'll kind of look at the different ways once you review where to go from there. So once you've pulled out all your materials, you've got them in front of you, you want to look at what you're covering. This is just a general list. Depending on your agency, what you're responsible for, it's going to look different. And this is just my opinion, if you will. But to me, this is a pretty thorough list of kind of everything that should be covered. So again, there's going to be more depending on what your agency is. But most of the time, especially if you're a full like dispatch center that's doing law, fire, EMS, 911, the whole kit and caboodle. These are the topics you want to make sure that you're covering when you're doing that. So it is a little scary, Gary. I like how that rhymes when you look at a list. But it really is not as bad as it looks. As someone who just rewrote a training manual, I can attest that some of these are easier than others, if you will. So for example, in my agency, in our training manual, our agency structure, our culture, professionalism, conduct, health, and wellness, those are all kind of part of our first 2 or 3 sections of the training manual. So it looks like a longer list when you break it down, but really they're not necessarily, whole 20-page sections in and of themselves. You can kind of combine some stuff. It's just to give that employee a good base knowledge and a full knowledge kind of what your center offers as far as health and wellness, what expectations are, what the agency culture looks like. And then next, when you're looking at the training, make sure it's relevant. I think oftentimes, especially in smaller agencies, when they send people to training, maybe it's more law or fire, but then they're like, yeah, dispatch, you like training, you can go. And we sit there and we go, I mean, this is like nice to learn, but it's not helping me in my job. If you take a second, just take a second, think back to the last thing that you learned, whatever it was, dispatch, not dispatch, something that you learned. We were just putting consoles together. So I learned how to put some consoles together. If you think about it, there's 2 reasons that we learn things. We want to learn it or we need to learn it. I did not want to learn how to put consoles together, but I needed to learn it. So we want to make sure anytime we're teaching things that it's either they need to know it or maybe we're including it because they want to know it. They've asked a question, and so we're elaborating because they're interested in that. Excuse me. So if you always keep those 2 things in mind, that can be really helpful too. Do they need to know it at this point or do they want to know it? If it's not one of those things, then we really can leave it out because it's not something that's necessarily going to stick if it's not for one of those 2 reasons. Excuse me. And then after that, you want to look again at the relevance. I love this quote. If content were water, relevance would be the drinkability. Is your content drinkable? Are your trainees getting what they need from that? Is it relevant to what they're doing every day? I myself am sometimes really bad at this in that I get so excited to teach people about dispatch and I just want them to know all the things. And I really have to stop myself and go, okay, but does day 3 person need to know the full inner workings of law radio? Not that I'm teaching it to them, but I just go off on a tangent or something comes up and then I just want to show them everything. So I kind of have to stop myself and go, on day 3, this really is not relevant. We can wait. So you want to make sure that what you're teaching, again, is relevant. And it can be either relevant to the job, relevant to that period of training, whatever the relevance is, we have to make sure that it somehow relates back to that and making sure that, as it says, your training program is drinkable. And next, when you're looking at training, you're going to want to identify gaps. Just even going back to that list. So you can start with that list that I showed you, and you can get it on the replay, or if anybody needs it, I'll give you my email address at the end. Feel free to email me. I can send you that. But just even starting there, looking at those gaps. Do you cover all those topics? Looking at those topics, does that, kind of make you think of other topics that you want to include? So identifying gaps, and then even going a little further and making sure, is that something that actually needs to be included in training? Training is great and training can solve a lot of problems, but it doesn't necessarily, like, it's not the only option. So maybe if you have something and you're like, well, this isn't in our training program, should we put it in there? Should we not? Look at other options. Is there maybe some articles that can be read to cover it? Is it maybe something that's a job aid? We talk about weather in my training program, but because we live in Nebraska and it changes from morning to night and it can change so quickly, and we have tornado seasons and not so much tornado seasons, but that doesn't mean we can't have tornadoes necessarily. It's just not something we use all the time. So I may briefly talk about it, but for the most part, I'm just pointing them, here's our procedures, here's where you can find it, and here's a job aid for it. So that way you can pull it out and use it when necessary, because it's just not something that necessarily needs to be spent time on initial training, unless they come in and we know that there's storms coming up, in which case we might cover it. But if we're in the dead of winter, I'm kind of just giving them wasted material. It's not something that they're going to apply right away. So training isn't necessarily the answer. A job aid and pointing out the procedure is. So making sure when you identify those gaps, if it is something that needs to be solved by training, there might already be a course for it online that you can also use. It might just be an on-the-job coaching. It might be all that's required. Or when you're reviewing your training and looking at this, is it even a training issue or a person issue? Maybe it's an equipment issue. Maybe it's something with your processes that could be fixed or made easier, more efficient by fixing some equipment or a procedure that you have. So when you're identifying gaps, it's also a good time to look and see, is this a training issue or is this maybe something else? And then next, you want to utilize different teaching methods when you're training. As we all know, nobody wants to listen to somebody talk for hours and hours and hours and hours on end. And I think we all recognize that doesn't really work. Just talking at somebody, just telling them isn't training. And so we want to utilize the different methods for that. So you have your classroom sessions. If your agency decides where you're using a classroom, online instructor led, especially during the pandemic, there were agencies that went to more online and remote learning, creating your own self-paced courses. You have massive open line online classes, or the MOOCs. And sometimes they already have classes available. I think like Udemy is one, and maybe not so much Dispatch, but if you're looking at, training and instructor development, leadership development, those ones you might be able to find a course that's already in existence. So you don't have to take that upon yourself. And then coaching, mentoring, whatever that looks like for you, because it's also important when you're utilizing different teaching methods and when you're going through stuff. The brain short-term memory, can only handle about 2 to 4 chunks of information at a time. We are limited in how much we can take in. So we want to draw on their personal memory, connect it to previous learning, work with multiple senses to grab attention. And we just want to make sure that we're not overloading them. And so sometimes too, kind of switching things up, taking a break and switching to something else can help as well, because their brain's kind of full from the lecture portion. So now we can go to some hands-on stuff where they can practice, and their short-term memory isn't, hustling, trying to keep up. Another thing that I found interesting too is because memories are not held in one part of the brain, and this is just like the nerd in me coming out, but they're not in one part of the brain. So they're actually scattered. And the research that I've seen, or the information that I've gotten at, is we don't even really know in the brain where all our memories are stored. So there's still a lot of unknown territory that, maybe 50, 100 years, whatever it is, we'll know even more and be able to train even better, because they'll have kind of figured out that information. But just a fun fact for you, that they don't even know exactly where memories are stored completely in the brain. They're scattered throughout. So I would think there's probably some truth to, like, my brain is too full. And then along with that, if anybody is familiar, there is the 70-20-10. If you want to throw in the chat, just if you've ever heard of this, if you know what it means, if you're like, 7/20/10, never heard of her. Let me know, because I'm curious if this is something that I had kind of heard of before, but then read more up on it. And I think it's valuable to know, especially in this job where we do train a lot and we're working on a lot of stuff and there's a lot of skills to be mastered. So what the 70/20/10 guideline is 70% of what we learn is from hands-on experience. 20 is learned through developmental interaction, social learning, and 10 is through formal learning, classes, workshops, reading. So basically 70% of what we learn and remember come from about the hands-on practice. And that's obviously in dispatch why we focus a lot on the scenarios and all the hands-on, because that's where a lot of learning is coming from. And then 20 from the developmental social interaction when they're working with coworkers, when they're discussing stuff. And then 10% is that formal or somewhat informal, in my case, when you're in a small agency and doing everything, lecture and then reading. But it is a guide. The one thing to remember, it's a guide. It's not an absolute. It's not to say that you need to like crack open your training plan and go, okay, where's my 70% of hands-on? Where's my 20, my 10? It is a guide, and it's important to remember it does not mean that we want to just cut out the reading portion, because we do need that to give them the information. That's kind of the easiest way, right? How I do it is I give them and read it, then we go through it, then we demonstrate it. Then, there's the hands-on. So even though kind of the reading is only 10%, do not discount it or think that you need to get rid of it because like it's only 10%. What do we need it for? I want to go for the 70. They all work together. So the other three essential ingredients to the accompanying this framework too is you want to include challenging tasks, support from others, and supply of new content. So 70% is the challenging task, going with that. With the 20% of social interaction, developmental interaction, is support from others when you have other employees who are supporting the training. And then with that 10% of formal learning is the supply of new content. So just like I said, you don't want to discredit it because you have to have that supply of new content coming in as well. It's really that the 10% is critical to gain the new information. And then as well for just in general, like anything, hi, Leah. We always just work best when we get a mix of all of them too. So again, don't feel like you got to break it down and make sure you're hitting all those percentages. And when you are asking them to learn, it's enhanced when they can provide it in their own words. You give it back. Okay, now you explain it to me. One thing that I've found helpful, and as you've probably noticed in any of my classes, I try to teach from my own experience, is if I have two trainees that are, maybe one's just starting and one just got out of training, I like to have that one that just got out do kind of essentially teaching. They teach it, I'm there making sure it's correct. But one, they just learned it too, so it's fresh in their brain. But as we all know, it's one thing to do something ourselves and another to be able to explain it. And that explaining it challenges us. So it's also a great tip if you have trainees like that. And also if you just want like a 5-minute break, just kick back, let the older trainee teach the newer trainee. I always joke, they're like, and then she'll train her and, I'll go have a cup of coffee. It's great. But it really does help both parties too. And because then they can connect on kind of a coworker, almost like a mentor coaching level in a way, because they know that this person just went through what they're now going through. So it also helps make some connections as well. And anytime they can just apply it to case studies, anything like that is also really helpful. I apologize for talking fast. Since I took so long tying my shoes and dancing, now I'm rushing. So after that, you've set your goals for either developing the training or revamping the training. You've revisited all your training, what you've got. You've looked to identify gaps. Now you want to measure results. You want to make sure that those goals you set are being met. And these can, again, kind of be higher level things. We do phase evaluations. I do kind of an observation evaluation at the end of training. They can be kind of the smaller pieces during phases. We have quiz, we have observations, obviously DORs. Those are all the way to measure results to make sure that you're meeting these. Your QA, any kind of metrics you do even outside are also going to measure results of training, because it's all just showing the performance of the center. Okay, so I always include this one. It's kind of been a big hit when I've done similar sessions to this, and just the kind of practical setup. So anytime you're structuring effective training sessions or classes or just even sections of a manual, this is a really handy outline to follow. It's a good way to set it up. If you take it back to what you have in place now, you'd probably be surprised that it probably kind of follows, for the most part, what you have. So first and foremost, we always want to provide the why. We as adults want to know why we need to learn it. And again, that's that making it relevant. Make sure that the training is relevant, and the rationale. So, and then set realistic and relevant performance objectives. Why are we doing this? And then what are we trying to get out of it? Utilize activities that directly relate to those objectives and desired outcomes. And then evaluate your learner's performance. Again, the measurement, if we don't measure, we don't know if it's doing what we want it to do. And then provide feedback, which can be as simple as letting them know how they're doing. So for an example, as I've mentioned before, geography seems to be the easiest one across the board because we all do different stuff for other stuff. So this is just a breakdown then of what that looks like. Why do we need geography? Why do I need to learn about call taking? Why do we need to learn about the radio? Why do I need to learn about this? Why do I need to learn how to enter warrants? That's all it has to be, just the why. Why are you teaching them about this? And for me, I would almost say that a lot of times this is just vocally or spoken. It's not necessarily listed out in my training manual, but when I go through a section, usually I start it out with, and this is why it's important, and this is why we need to do it, and this is why we cover this. Some of them are a little more straightforward. Obviously, geography or call taking, radio requires less of an explanation because it's pretty straightforward. Performance objective, that they'll just be able to, locate all the highways on a map or whatever it is for your agency. And then activities, these can literally be whatever you want them to be, as long as they contribute to that performance objective and helping you meet it. Like literally whatever activities you want, you can throw in there, as long as they contribute to that performance objective. You can go crazy and do ride-alongs and do scavenger hunts and all those fun things, as long as they support the performance objective. And then evaluation. Did they do it right? And if it's, it's just a simple quiz or map that they label, it's pretty easy to look and see, did they do it right? And then feedback, which again, can be really easy. Just, did they get it right? Okay, we'll let them know they got it right. Did they get something wrong? Okay, let them know what they did wrong. I think sometimes when you bring structure and labels in these kind of things, it can be really overwhelming. And people are kind of like, oh man, I need all this stuff. So we get overwhelmed to think like, well, I got to do this. But again, I would almost venture to guess, if you went and applied this to your current training, if you have a pretty formal training program in place, you're going to see where this matches up. Yes, Lori, I agree. Should be written out in instructor manuals so you can handle over to whoever's teaching that portion is crystal clear. That's something I'm working on for mine, seeing what I do, so that way when the next person comes along and trains behind me, the next people, they can see exactly, and that way you're also consistent among all your trainees. So why training programs fail? So if you have a training program in place and it's not hitting the mark or the marks that you think that it should be, these might be some reasons why. So there are no clear training goals, or they don't line up with the mission of the agency or the position. Maybe there's some goals in there that aren't really relevant, or maybe they were relevant 5 years ago and it hasn't been updated, so now they're no longer relevant. There's no accountability measures. There's no way to make sure that people are doing what they're supposed to be doing. And then this is a big one. Training is done initially and then not ongoing. So your training program, I think sometimes it's easy to forget, is not just those new employees. It's everybody, every day, includes the whole center overall. that's the training program. So you want to make sure that you're doing some type of continuing education. I know too, just from recent conversations, it's really tough on new trainees when they go through this maybe really formal training program and they're learning stuff and they get all this feedback, which sometimes can be frustrating, but they're getting constant feedback. And then they get out of training and they hear like crickets and they're just kind of floating along like, I think I'm doing it right, but I don't know. So we want to make sure, even though sometimes feedback can be hard, we're still giving that, because I promise you it's much better when you get feedback instead of just like out there floating. Think you're doing it okay. Yes, Jody, it's super important for ongoing training as well. And then again, sometimes our stakeholders, so our upper management, anybody like that, we have to make sure they're on board, which it can take a while to do that. So that's why it's really good too to have metrics in place and to show why things are successful and why we need these things, because it improves XYZ, and that can help build support. Another reason why there's no consistency, like we just kind of mentioned. You want to make sure that you have it outlined, so that way pretty much anybody can pick up that book. It can just literally say, in front of my sections, I have instructor, page where it's like complete XYZ activities. Within so many weeks, give this quiz. Within so many days, do this activity. Discuss sections A.1 through A.16 first, and then go back and do these other ones. It can be as detailed as you need it to be, just to ensure the consistency. And then lastly, there's a lack of documentation. We always want to be doing our DORs or any kind of documentation showing progress and that things have been completed. So next, I kind of wanted to switch this ending part up, and I encourage everybody in the chat to jump in with whatever suggestions you have as well. I just have 3 questions that have come up in the CTO group recently. So I'm going to kind of give my opinion, because I love giving my opinion clearly, but also just to hear from you guys as well. If you have any feedback that then maybe somebody who's watching this now or watching it later is like, yes, I'm having trouble with that. What do you guys recommend? So first one, what to do when a trainee has trouble with radio comprehension. So some things you can try is, if you have headsets, switching the headsets. In the book, you're not listening. I'm going to mess this up. What you're missing and why it matters. She talks about even how our right side is more analytical. Our left ear we use to listen to emotion. So there are some differences in our ears. So maybe even just switching can be helpful. Or you might try taking out the headset and listening to speakers, or vice versa. Sometimes those work. Some of it just may be exposure. The more they can listen to it, the more they catch on, making sure they know 10 codes or any kind of signals codes, anything like that. So that way they're familiar and they recognize those. Does anybody, like I said, feel free to throw it in the chat if you have any other suggestions or anything you've tried. Or right now you can use the ask a question feature, or you can just throw the questions in the chat, to be honest. Don't tell Ricardo I said that. Whatever you got, just hit me with it. This is honestly my favorite part, is like discussing and coming up with different ways that we can solve issues for each other and not reinvent the wheel. So if you have anything with radio comprehension or any other questions, just throw them in there. Next, how to help improve trainee confidence. I think this is it's a good question. And I think if you've trained for any length of time, it's something we definitely run into. And sometimes I think it disguises itself as a skill issue. We might think that they can't hear or understand, or we might think that they don't know how to call take or what questions to ask, when really it's not that they don't know, it's just that they don't have the confidence and they're not sure of themselves to ask the questions they think they need to ask, or to say the things on the radio that they think they need to say. So first and foremost, when you're working with a trainee and you're thinking it's a skill issue, but then when you kind of isolate the skill itself and they know, and you ask them, the questions, and they're able to come up, look at their confidence. Do they look like maybe they're just not sure of themselves? I think that's kind of the first step to kind of isolate it out. Is it a confidence issue? Is it a skill issue? Going back really quick, because the chat's a little behind. Jody said for radio, suggested they listen to a scanner app and the jargon used. Give them specific time to listen to the radio traffic prior to being on the radio. Yeah, the exposure I think is helpful. Lori said we have them listen to radio traffic while on training console, type it out, as well as live to get flow of jargon. Becky, we have told them to practice listening to two different things in a social setting or at home. Talk to someone while listening to TV or radio and tell me what you heard. Yeah, anytime you can kind of get the multitasking, that split ear going. I've had trainees I have them listen to just like a podcast or a news story while they type out like a somewhat simple story. So they're typing something else while they're listening. And then I ask them questions about both of them later on just to see what they picked up from each of them. Yes, Lori, I like that when you let agencies know that you have new trainees coming on, especially if you have a lot coming on, to let them know, like, hey guys, can you enunciate? Because sometimes when they get used to, those of us who've been around a while, they just talk how they talk, and we're like translators, and people look at us like, how do you even know what they said? And I'm like, I just know. So yeah, that's really helpful too. But yeah, the exposure I think is a big thing, listening to the radio traffic. Switching gears back to trainee confidence. I like Jody, providing them a positive attitude and even asking them a bad or positive part of their day, and giving them feedback and making sure that we're not just kind of beating them down. It's easy to do sometimes, I think, we need to correct this, we need to correct this, we need to correct this. But we want to make sure we let them know what they're doing good. Make sure that they know that they're doing it well. Especially if you feel like it fluctuates. One day they do really well, one day they don't. Kind of remind them how they did yesterday. Tim said use positive reinforcement and tell them I trust them. Yeah, I think trust is a big thing too. And I tell my trainees, I'm not going to step in unless there becomes like a safety issue, because I think you learn best sometimes from your mistakes. So I'm going to kind of let you muddle through. So just know that if I'm not stepping in, you're getting it. It may not be the prettiest, but you're getting it if I'm not pushing you out of the way to get on the phone or radio. Or build confidence in the future, forward feedback. Yeah, going from where you are, how can you improve, and going forward with it to do better. Zach said, on the confidence, do you suggest you remove yourself as a trainer so they have to rely on themselves when they rely on you too much? Yes, I think sometimes it's kind of the same with radio traffic and a recorder. We have to remove that kind of support a little bit to force them, which doesn't sound like the nicest way, but force them to rely on themselves. So that way they know they can rely on themselves and that they know what they're doing. And like I said, I've asked them if I make them nervous as director in the same room. It usually does. So I try to limit my time in dispatch until I get more comfortable with their trainer. And I think that's awesome, Becky, to have that awareness that, like, even though I know Becky and she's great, and, I don't think she's like beating down her trainees, just recognizing that because she has that title, that can be a little intimidating. That's your boss and you don't want to screw up in front of them. So that's also true too. If you're a member of management and you find that you go in there and people are just like, it might be you, not in a personal way. It may just be the position you hold. So also being cognizant of that. And then going to the last one. This has been a big one recently. How can we get others on board to train? I agree, Katie. Becky is super scary. This one came up too at our CTO show and tell not too long ago. And I think sometimes a lot of agencies struggle with it because people don't want to train. It's a lot of work. It's kind of like twice the stress because now you're responsible for yourself and this trainee. So it can be tough. Just some things that I've seen. If you are going to require employees to train, make sure that's known very clearly when you bring them on, that's just might be your responsibility, or most likely will be a responsibility. Anytime, obviously, we can add incentives, whether that's pay, comp time, whatever it is, that's going to help. Sometimes it doesn't. Gary said it used to be an honor to be picked. I think that's true. And I don't know where that kind of shift took place, that it's not an honor anymore. But if you can build it back up in your center that like this, it's an elite group, if you will, that gets to train, that does help too. I try to remind people like this is, you're helping your agency because you're training, but you're building your resume. This is something that later on, if you're looking to maybe do something else, like this is helping you too. This can be a great step. So if anybody has any other suggestions too, I just know this topic has come up. Naomi said, we have a lateral trainee who isn't passing our call taking. We are 14 weeks into it. She knows all the info. When it's go time, she can't do it. She says she doesn't like being watched, but she isn't at a point where we trust her to get the right info. How do I get someone past that? That's a great question, Naomi, and I wish I had all the answers. It's really tough because, yes, obviously we can't walk away. And I don't know if it's even something as simple as, can you turn your back? Can you just turn around so that way you hear and you can instantly flip back around and do something if necessary? But to where you're physically not watching her, that's something to try. If you're looking, away, working on something else to where you are listening, but maybe physically to her, it's looking like you're not listening, if that's something. Oh, so you only says, I am turned away from her and only intervene when necessary already. That's a tough one because it's kind of more of an individual issue that I'm not sure the best way that you would work through that. Because I'm assuming she's had a lot of practice and you're kind of doing everything you can to make it so she's not watched. So that it might almost have to be a conversation with her to let her know kind of where she stands. And this is a hurdle we've got to get over. And if she has any ideas, might be the thing. Sometimes it just kind of comes down to a conversation. Again, if I had all the answers, it would be amazing, but I would also write a book and get rich. So I haven't done that. So obviously I don't have all the answers, but if I think of anything else, I will definitely reach out to you, Naomi. If I get any other ideas or if anybody has any suggestions, it can be kind of a failure to retain at times too as well. Going next, since we only have a few minutes left. Again, my quotes. I love my quotes. Our job as trainers, instructors, and educators is to help our adult learners learn. Their success is our success. So again, our goal should always be to, just help them succeed. Oftentimes, I feel like in some Facebook groups, people say my trainee is not doing this. My trainee, people are like, oh, well, they can't do it. They can't, just cut them loose. And there are some times where we have to make that decision or they come to that decision on their own. But as a trainer, our goal should be success. So we really do have to take a step back and be patient and look at all the options, come to events like this, ask the questions, see if anybody has other input. Even Gary just said if it's a lateral transfer, she's stuck on other agency ways. So that's what's great about this too, because our goal should always be to make sure they succeed. And let's see, going back, she's at a previous agency for 2 years, took 14 months to train there, and they were single discipline. We were tri-discipline. And that may be something too to look at. Kind of pressure from command staff can be a big thing, but sometimes you just kind of got to lay out the facts. All I can say is I'm glad it's not me. That's terrible. I'm sorry. But I've definitely kind of been in those positions before, and it can get very stressful. But also, if you as a trainer know that you have taken every step, you have used every tool in your toolbox, you have done everything you can, and you can kind of go to sleep at night knowing that you did your best, we also have to be happy with that too. We have to just accept that. And sometimes that's really hard, especially as dispatchers when we want to control everything. Then just a few more slides. If you are a reader, these are two of my favorite books that have so much fantastic training information that if you read them, you'll recognize some of the information that I've covered today. I just can't say enough good things about them. Then on the Dispatch Lab, there is the Training Companion ebook. It's got different information about effective training sessions, different activity ideas for stuff like multitasking, active listening, call taking, those kind of things. There is an updated edition that I'm releasing. I think that's next week is the 15th. And then, so I've updated and added, there'll be even more information, and then as well as information on onboarding, training manuals, effective feedback, and the other activity ideas that I've come across as well. And that's available at the dispatchlab.com under the ebooks tab. I will say that with an update is also coming a price increase. So if you want it, I would grab it now. That's my only tip for you. And then lastly, not least, right on the buzzer, but if you have a question, feel free to throw it in the chat or the ask a question feature. There is my email if you have any questions, always available. On Facebook, there's the Dispatch Lab page, and then on Instagram as well. The Facebook page is where I put a lot of information, the link to the Dropbox with different training resources. Feel free to find me on LinkedIn. I share stuff there as well. I also do training consulting. If you have a training program and you're just not sure how it's going and you need a second set of eyes, reach out to me. Definitely offer that as well. Thank you guys for being patient with the technical difficulties. I appreciate you so much. My people, I love doing these things and seeing all the familiar faces. So, and Ricardo's back.
Dude, I literally just finished this other one. My worst fear was that you were going to finish around the same time that they were.
You're good.
But it's all good. I heard you. I could hear you just a little bit going into your wrap up and stuff. And I'm like, oh man, are we going to do it? Are we going to do it?
I'll just keep talking and keep talking.
Yeah. So did you happen to see the question that was in here?
No, I can't see
Okay,
it.
so let me do that one here really quick. Let me click this here, and it says, what about trainer confidence or enticing people to want to train?
Okay, so I think that might have been before we touched on it, but like I said, any kind of incentives, if you can make it, I think sometimes more of like a not elite isn't the word I want, but like a position that's earned, not just anybody gives it. Those things usually help. I think making sure it's known at the forefront that you might have to train in your role, and kind of just watching people, I think, as they come into your center. It might be somebody new who can't train then, but you may see kind of an interest, so you can develop that. So at the point where they are at a point where they can train, they can kind of step right into that role too. So always keep your eye out with new employees, even though they're new. It might be something that they, want to do. And then the other thing they didn't mention earlier was consistency is great to keep it with one person, but maybe you have somebody who can do that initial training, and then you have somebody who maybe has higher expectations that they can almost be like a finisher, that they're that person that's the last test before that person goes out onto the floor on their own.
All right. Excellent. Thank you, dude, so much.
No, thank you.
We got to figure it out, right? The way we always do.
Yep.
Dispatch style. We got to figure it out. So it was awesome. Thank you so very much for being here, for doing this session, for being a sponsor, a gold sponsor, and everyone who is watching right now. Please make sure to check out the Discord community. Once you get in there, make sure you go to the rules channel, hit the green check mark, and then all of the other channels will appear. And then you can go to the Dare to Be Great channel. There's two of them in there. There's DTBG3 speakers, which is for the speakers, but that's where we are talking. And then there's the public one, which is Dare to Be Great. That's where all of the conversation is going on, where you can connect further with each other as well as our sponsor speakers. So check us out there. Check out Halcyon and the Dispatch Lab and everything she's doing. And thank you once again. And we'll see you all in the next one.
Yes. Thank you, guys.